Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, here at MonkeyWrench Books in Austin. I've heard about this bookstore literally for years, and so this is my first opportunity to be here. And these bookstores are just wonderful little places where people can gather and connect, and that's really important. And you know, books have enormous societal value, and I hope you'll support MonkeyWrench as it continues in its many shapes and forms. So I'm going to do several things this evening, talk a little bit about the new book with Chomsky called Power Systems. I just saw him about 10 days ago at MIT. We did another marathon interview of about 3 hours. And so he just turned 85, still very, very sharp and very incredibly dedicated. It's rare that the country has produced, this kind of intellectual who, had just not only has such command of information and analyses, but is also so available to people. And I remember, and I tell this story elsewhere in a film or in another book, that once I was with him in his office and he was entertaining some junior high school students who were writing for a newsletter, and outside were like these high-powered Nobel Prize winners, waiting to see him. And he wasn't about to rush those kids out, because he does practice solidarity and equality, and he's very egalitarian in that way. So I've really been fortunate. This actually, if you want to know the background, 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, 35 years ago, I wrote him a letter, and to my surprise, he wrote back. When you write to famous people, usually you get a form letter back, or something like, thanks for writing, nice to hear from you, have a nice day. But in this case, it was an actual response to some comments I had made, and then we started a correspondence. And it was about that time at KGNU in Boulder. I had my own program, and I suggested to him, well, let's do an interview. And that was 30 years ago, and the first interview was politics and language. It's a theme that he and I have been returning to over and over again, and is part of the new book, Power Systems, as well. I think one of the things I learned from Howard Zinn is to inject a little bit of humor into presentations. So, hey, NSA, who are you going to spy on and in what way? Hey, TSA, who are you going to pull over today? Lies, fill up agency files. UAVs rain death from the skies. Pilotless drones will blow out your eyes. Government agents, look out. Here comes the FBI, IEDs, RPGs, WMDs, CIA, NSC, DEA. There goes the USA. There goes the USA. There goes the USA. And Leonard Cohen, the great Canadian songwriter and poet, posed the question, democracy is coming to the USA, as a kind of an affirmation. But maybe when he wrote that, that was the case in the 70s. But I think today, if you were writing the same work, it would have a question mark at the end, because systematically, particularly since September 11th, the national security state has gone into not only high dudgeon, but high gear in dismantling basic rights and eviscerating the Constitution, the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment. All of these things have been trashed in the defense of national security and supposedly protecting us from evildoers. Why there are evildoers out there, of course, is never posed. The question, people seem to have are genetically disposed to killing Americans and doing violence against the United States. Might there be some connection with U.S. foreign policy? Could there be some connection between the 735 bases that the U.S. has around the world and these massive intervention armies and air forces and navies? We have 11 aircraft carrier battle groups. No other country on the globe has even one aircraft carrier battle group. And now Chuck Hagel, the War Department, I don't like to say Defense Department, but the War Department Secretary, has just announced some modest cutbacks in military spending. They're ramping up high-tech weapons and Navy SEALs and Special Operations Forces. And guess what? They're eliminating a plane that was designed to stop Soviet tanks from rumbling into Western Europe, the A-10 Warthog. And for this, he's getting lots of kudos from the corporate media that, he's really making tough cuts, but he's not cutting back on Trident submarines or even nuclear weapons. And all of these, F-35s and the other new generation of high-tech weaponry continue to be produced because the U.S. garrisons the world, and that garrisoning has generated an enormous amount of hostility and animosity toward the United States. And this is playing out particularly in the Middle East, where the U.S. has had very strong intervention since the end of World War II. In fact, even before the end of World War II, by 1943, the U.S. pretty much figured out that they're going to win the war. And Roosevelt ordered his State Department to come up with a post-war scenario. What is the world going to look like post-World War II? Britain, France would have been smashed. The Soviet Union had been taking tremendous losses, and even more in the subsequent 2 years of the war. And so they came up with what's called Grand Area Strategy. And that essentially divided the globe into different spheres of influence, all American spheres of influence. And you see that playing out in 2014, where the Pentagon has divided the globe into those same kinds of commands. So there's the South America Command, there's the Africa Command, there's the Middle East Command. Different regions of the globe have been turned into fortresses where American troops and air bases and naval bases are located. There was a slight problem at the end of 1945. The British were still around and the French were hanging out, but the U.S. figured out ways to marginalize them. A key event that is grossly underplayed and underemphasized in what is called U.S. history, or the teaching of U.S. history. Maybe at UT Austin they do a better job, but I kind of doubt it. And that was the meeting on a destroyer, the USS Quincy, between FDR and Ibn Saud on February 12th, 1945, exactly 2 months to the day when Roosevelt would die. And it was at this meeting, Roosevelt was coming from Yalta, where he had just met with Stalin and Churchill, and it was at this meeting where the deal was sealed. The Faustian bargain was enacted between the United States and Saudi Arabia to guarantee the sovereignty of the Saudi kingdom and the defense of the Saudi monarchy in return for access to Saudi oil, U.S. corporations having access to Saudi oil. So that became the big strategic interest of the U.S. In the Middle East. And mind you, this is 3 years before the formation of the State of Israel. So those who, I think kind of misleadingly say, well, it's all about Israel. Now it has become somewhat more about Israel, but certainly from a strategic point of view, it's always been about oil and natural gas, and any independent nationalism had to be crushed and eliminated. The first one to raise his head was Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran, popularly elected, rather a small D Democrat, who had funny ideas about oil in Iran. He thought that the revenues from oil should benefit the Iranian people. Clearly a retrograde idea, but one can understand this since he had been educated in France at the Sorbonne and was familiar with French literature, égalité and all of that. And so the British were very upset, which had been, Iran had primarily been a British sphere of influence, and they immediately contacted Washington. Truman kind of said, we're not going to get involved in this, but as soon as Eisenhower became president and Allen Dulles became CIA director and John Foster Dulles was Secretary of State, these were fanatical Calvinist, anti-communists who saw the Red Menace everywhere, who saw Moscow's hand everywhere, that the Iranians could have no legitimate grievances against the Anglo-Iranian Petroleum Company, which later became British Petroleum, which today is BP. Those are its antecedents. And so Eisenhower signs off on Operation Ajax and destroys, there's a coup d'etat in Iran. The Shah, who had fled the country, is flown back from Rome on a CIA plane and sits on the peacock throne for the next 26 years. Actions have consequences. During those 26 years, he repressed the left. He was extremely tyrannical and autocratic. He sent billions of dollars to buy U.S. weapons with the money that he had been making now from the oil. And so there was this kind of circular exchange between Washington and Tehran became a key ally of the U.S. strategy to control the Middle East, which relied on three non-Arab state actors: Israel, Turkey, and Iran. These were called, by Nixon's Defense Secretary Melvin Laird, local cops on the beat. And so they would have the local cops on the beat take care of any, little police actions, like in one instance, the Shah sent troops to Dhofar in the Persian Gulf to crush a rebellion. But if something big needed to happen, then police headquarters were in Washington, and then the Marines would be called to carry out, full-scale operations. This was a hugely significant event. What happened in Iran in 1953, I think, again, scant attention has been paid to it. It effectively destroyed democracy in Iran, and it sent a message to other small d Democrats in the region that, do not raise your head because Uncle Sam, may come down and just decapitate you. And so the very next year, that Iran coup becomes the template for a series of coups that the U.S. carries out. In Guatemala, Jacobo Arbenz, who regarded FDR as his hero and the New Deal as a model, is overthrown. A dictatorship is introduced, a military dictatorship, resulting over the years, over the decades, in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Guatemalans. This pattern of rhetorically supporting democracy, but in practice undermining it, in fact destroying it, has been a very salient feature of U.S. foreign policy since 1945. But if you read or listen or watch the corporate control media, people won't have much of an idea about this historical reality, because we really don't have any kind of independent media that's functioning outside of cheerleading and being stenographers. They're actually practicing a form of prostitution, and the journalists themselves are prostitutes. They're anchors. They compete for the best hair on the air. They're paid millions of dollars in salaries. They themselves are celebrities. I remember, I think it was the Republican convention in Houston, or was it a Democratic convention in the 80s or 90s? I was here, and Connie Chung, who was then a CBS anchor, walked in the room, and everybody just dropped everything and rushed to her as if she were, Angelina Jolie or Elizabeth Taylor at the height of her fame and fortune. There is this, glamorization and making the network anchors into celebrities themselves. I mean, I think the corporate media, it's safe to say, pose a genuine health hazard to the American people and should be defined as such by the Surgeon General. And you know what? They've done a fairly good job in labeling cigarette packets with warnings that if you smoke, this is what will happen to you. I think when people are watching or listening or reading corporate news, similar messages should be transmitted that this is dangerous for your mental health. This will cause, migraines. This will interfere with a good night's sleep if you watch this kind of programming. And in particular, it's the liberal media that's the most outrageous. I mean, I don't even talk about Fox and O'Reilly and Limbaugh and people like that. I mean, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, it's too easy. It's the liberal media that's really interesting and I think, deserves a lot of scrutiny. People like Charlie Rose, the NewsHour on PBS, also known as the Petroleum Broadcasting Service, and NPR, National Public Radio, with its morning edition, MOURNING, and Some Things Considered. Supposedly these detailed newscasts, which I suspect many of us all listen to. I mean, I certainly do. In the same way I monitor the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times when I can have a chance to read it, because I want to know what elites are thinking, what their line is, what's being put out. I'm not concerned about whether Justin Bieber is going to be arrested for drinking and driving simultaneously. I'm not interested in the kinds of shenanigans that the Kardashian sisters engage in, with their big hair and big breasts and big hips and whatever other scandals that are going on that create a different kind of media that I call, weapons of mass distraction. That's, to keep people's attention away from what's going on. But then you have the elite media as represented by those agencies I just mentioned, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, the major TV networks, and particularly NPR. Everyone likes NPR. People are very civil. They speak in complete sentences. They seem to have a mastery of English. They can actually articulate ideas in a whole paragraph. There's no yelling. People speak and then the other person speaks. And it's very civil, but I think it lulls people into a false sense of reality, because what they're masking over really are the crimes of empire, the crimes of imperialism. And I hesitate to call it the capitalist economic system, because it's not really capitalism. This is a completely hybrid form of capitalism where there's massive state intervention in sector after sector. So, I think the Occupy movement got it right. We got sold out, they got bailed out. According to the, masters of capitalist doctrine like David Ricardo and Adam Smith and others, if you fail in your business, then you should go out of business. But not if you're too big to fail. Then you get taxpayer support. Then we, the people, come to the rescue of these enormous corporations who then get rewarded for having failed, for having conducted bad business practices, in many instances criminal and unethical business practices. So I think one of the great achievements of the Occupy movement was to inject into the public discourse the 1%, 99% formula. And even mainstream politicians talk in these terms occasionally. Not all of them, but some of them actually mention this bifurcation, this enormous gap, which really begins in the 1970s. That's when wages go flat in the United States, and multiple things happened at the same time. Computers are being introduced. Robots, mechanized labor is replacing actual workers. Offshore, you have this whole phenomenon of American factories moving to third world countries where labor is cheap. There are no unions. There aren't any environmental laws or protections or OSHA, any of those things. And all of these things are happening. And at the same time, around in the 70s as well, the gap between the CEOs, the workers in the suites, versus the workers on the plant floor starts to dramatically widen. So it used to be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to 1. Suddenly it becomes 20, 40. I think today it's about 400 to 1. That's the ratio in terms of disparity in pay. And you have also at this time, partly as a response to the 60s and all the ferment that was existing in the country, a wholesale attack on unions, on organized labor, who were identified as a very pernicious cancer that had to be excised from the American capitalist system. And so it became more and more difficult for unions to organize. Today, from their peak around 35, 40% of the workforce, today it's in single digits and declining. And just recently, there was an example of United Auto Workers trying to organize a Volkswagen plant in Chattanooga, and Volkswagen, to its credit, at least publicly, did not take a stand on the unions one way or another, but workers and the public were intimidated by outside intervention, as well as high-profile Tennessee politicians who said that, if the union is voted in, the jobs will be lost. This SUV won't be built here. It will be built elsewhere. Essentially, the workers were blackmailed. And speaking of the 60s and crimes, and I'm always taken aback landing in Houston at George H.W. Bush International Airport. Usually, historically, American cities and states wait until war criminals die before they honor them by naming them a highway or a freeway or a building or an airport. But in this case, this guy is still alive, and it's rather repulsive. And then coming out of the airport, the first sign I see is "Pray for our troops." Well, I don't know if you're religiously inclined or not. I pray for them every day, that they should come home to the United States and do work here in building roads and schools and infrastructure, rather than killing Afghans or Iraqis or Pakistanis or Yemenis or Somalis and many others in West and South Asia. And driving this morning from Austin, I saw a very interesting bumper sticker apropos of the shirt that I'm wearing, which I will hold close to the microphone here for radio, because they can pick this up. Fighting terrorism since 1492. And what was the bumper sticker? Fighting terrorism since 1861 with the Confederate flag. How ironic is that? This is viewed, the fight against slavery is viewed as a fight against terrorism. And and adopting that, I thought, was rather ironic. I think these Native American chiefs got it right as they tried to defend their land and their culture and civilization from the Western European onslaught that enveloped them. And not far from here is, in fact, another war criminal's residence, George W. Bush. I don't know about you, but I'm enraged that an unambiguous war criminal, he and Cheney and Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz and Fife and Rice and Powell and all the rest of them, how they're walking around not only free, but celebrated, getting hundreds of thousands of dollars to speak at public universities, writing books that they don't even write. They have a ghostwriter that they pay, with $20 million advances. Now, $20 million is not chump change. It's a little bit less than what I'm getting tonight from MonkeyWrench, but still, it's a respectable amount of money. Let's not sneer at it. So I think, when the U.S. talks about the rule of law, you just have to gasp when you realize that lawbreakers of this scale are celebrated and are walking around free, and all the presidents come when the Bush Library is opened at SMU, and they completely go into a state of amnesia. Have they forgotten everything that's happened in the last 10 years? Apparently, You know, there's Obama talking about Bush in laudatory terms. You know, you may have disagreed with his policies, but he loves America. There was no question about his patriotism. You know, and I'm going like, you know, I want to give this guy, wring his neck. You know, and Clinton, the same thing. And this plays out over and over again. When Nixon, the Nixon Library was dedicated, the Nixon funeral, they trot out these presidents. And then there's a tsunami of cliches and platitudes about what a great country this is, and we may have our differences between Democrats and Republicans, but we're all, the blood that flows through our veins is red, white, and blue. We're all Americans, you know, when it really comes down to it. So, you know, those kinds of things outside the U.S. are held in very high relief. I had the privilege of living in India for many years and seeing the U.S. through the lens of Indian media is very different from the lens that we see ourselves in, or how we depict ourselves here in the United States. So that was a very valuable learning experience for me. Unfortunately, to show you the perils of independent journalism, the world's largest democracy felt it had to deport me from India in 2011 because I had been reporting on various rebellions in that country, particularly one in Kashmir, where about 70,000 Kashmiris have been killed, tens of thousands more have been, hundreds of thousands have been jailed, imprisoned, tortured, and brutalized. Many thousands have disappeared. A story that's basically unknown here in the United States, and I was one of the few independent journalists trying to bring attention to what was going on, because India was very successful in skillfully deploying its propaganda to show, you know, that it's the world's, not only the world's largest democracy, you know, everyone is a vegetarian and practicing yoga, and everybody plays sitar and is doing meditation and things like that. You know, so it's such a, you know, wonderful country, particularly compared to Pakistan, which was always it was always juxtaposed with Pakistan, where there was this out-of-control jihadis. A little thing is left out, that most of those jihadis were invented by Washington and Riyadh during the 1980s, during the Great Jihad against the Soviet Union. Speaking of the Soviet Union, you know, there was a very well-known practice of when someone would fall out of favor, let's say there'd be a picture of Stalin with Trotsky and Bukharin and other, you know, members of the hierarchy. And if someone would fall out of favor, the next time the picture was published, all of a sudden that person wasn't there. And then the other person disappeared after he fell out of favor. And ultimately, it was just Stalin himself standing at the podium. Well, I had a similar kind of experience when I published this book with Iqbal Ahmed, a great Pakistani radical, close friend of Edward Said, a major intellectual force and activist. Unfortunately, passed away a few years ago. I was privileged enough to know him. And we did a book called Terrorism, Theirs and Ours. And I'll just pass this around. Please pass it back after you look at the cover, particularly the back cover. This is one of those, a picture is worth 1,000 words, when you see the back cover, and I'll explain as we go along. The Afghan Mujahideen were invented by Washington to fight the Soviets, and they recruited the most fanatical, extreme jihadists from around the world to come to Pakistan to be trained and then to go into Afghanistan. Well, you know, a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum, like that Broadway show was named. They had other ideas after the Soviet Union withdrew from Afghanistan. They decided to stay there and formed other political military formations that you may have heard of, like the Harakat al-Mujahideen, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and other extremist groups that are now plaguing Washington and are being used as justification for ongoing intervention in South Asia. Well, on the back of this book, Terrorism, Theirs and Ours, here is Ronald Reagan welcoming the Afghan Mujahideen. And Reagan, on this occasion, called them freedom fighters. He compared them to the founding fathers. Clearly, he knew something about the founding fathers that we didn't know. And these guys, you know, homicidal maniacs, misogynists, patriarchs, drug dealers, drug traffickers, are in the Oval Office. This bald-headed guy is John Poindexter. This is a CIA officer, Milt Bearden. You know, here is this photograph. We got this in 2000 from the Reagan Library in California. A couple of years ago, I had a hunch just to go back, because it's been a decade that I've been talking about this around the country, pointing out that, you know, there's this picture of Reagan with these murderers in the Oval Office, and, you know, has anyone noticed? Well, again, a curious thing happened. It's disappeared from the archive. The date is there. I think it's March 15th, 1986, if I'm June 16th, 1986, but there are no photos. It's been eliminated from history. It's gone down Orwell's memory hole. So it's not only the old Soviet Union where these kinds of disappearances occur. It's also right here in the US. And in this particular book, which is written long before 9/11, Iqbal Ahmed said Osama bin Laden is a sign of things to come. He had been to Afghanistan. He had seen the carnage that the Mujahideen had been wreaking in that country, and the components of that US-backed military intervention and Saudi-backed military intervention, which kind of brings us back full circle to FDR meeting with Ibn Saud on the USS Quincy on February 12, 1945. The US has backed this most fundamentalist extremist regime on the planet, which is greatly exacerbating tensions and violence in the Middle East, particularly in Syria, where it has funded a lot of the Wahhabi, Salafist, fundamentalist jihadis that have created sectarian warfare in Syria. And this is all part of a larger scheme to make Iran very weak, part of the Shia-Sunni conflict internal to Islam, where Saudi Arabia sees itself as the protector of Islam. Not only is it the custodians of the holy sites in Mecca and Medina, but overall it is regarded as the birthplace of Islam, and Saudi Arabia has appropriated this enormous prestige and power to itself, and it exerts that power through oil money primarily, and U.S. protection, U.S. diplomatic support, U.S. military support, and this has been a constant theme since the end of World War II. Any independent Arab nationalism is to be resisted, to be overthrown, to be defeated. Also Iranian nationalism. If the Turks get any ideas, they will be dealt with as well by Washington. So there's just not any space for secular democratic movements to evolve, to develop, to come forth. And in a way, Washington has preferred sectarian formations because that justifies the constant intervention and the location of U.S. bases. So the policy reinforces itself, and it keeps repeating itself over and over again. And as Orwell once said, sometimes the hardest thing to see is right in front of your nose. And for the media here in particular, they either choose not to see this, or if they do see it, they choose to ignore it, because there is no attention being paid to these kinds of issues beyond the usual, sloganeerings about Muslims and violence, and somehow Islam is connected with, murder, as if Christianity has a record of pacifism. Does anyone know the history of the 20th century and how so-called Christians behaved? It's not a record that you want to write home about particularly. But crucially, you'll notice how Muslims are dealt in as an a monolithic block. We're always hearing about the Muslim world, but we never hear about the Christian world or the Buddhist world or the Hindu world. But there's this supposed uniform Muslim world where everyone is in lockstep and regimented, and they all read the Quran and they all speak Arabic. I've got news for you. The Arabs are a minority in the Islamic world. Of the 1.2 billion Muslims in the world, there are only about 250, 300 million who are Arabs. The largest numbers are in South and Southeast Asia. Indonesia, Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan are the 4 countries with the largest Muslim populations, followed by Iran, non-Arab, and Turkey, non-Arab. So you see, that it's a much more complicated mosaic than the media or, the state power would lead people to believe, because they want to create, in the wake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, it was absolutely crucial that the U.S. find a new permanent threat. I mean, you could almost sense the panic in Washington in 1990, 91. How are we going to justify this massive military-industrial complex? All of this spending on weapons and nuclear weapons and, the next generation of high-tech weapons. And, they were floundering. Noriega didn't work. Gaddafi didn't work. They even tried the Medellin and Cali cartel. That didn't work. And then they discovered, conveniently, Islamic terrorism, Islamic fundamentalism, the new evil empire that had to be resisted. And of course, in the imperial mindset, as exemplified by Obama, and I'm not picking on Obama in particular, I mean, he just happens to be the president right now. But again, the pattern is unmistakable. If you just see his speech at the UN, in September of 2013. The U.S. has a unique role, I'm almost quoting verbatim, a unique role to play in the world. It is the one indispensable nation. It has to do things that other countries cannot do or won't do. And then words like, Providence has given the U.S. this opportunity or this responsibility. Divine grace, they're all, history, that's another magical thing that's kind of, pulled out of a hat. History has forced this on the United States. It's not something we wanted, but it's history that makes us be, the world's hyperpower. Well, look around. The world's hyperpower is falling apart internally. It still has the gold-plated machinery of empire externally, but internally, what's happening? Look in your communities. Schools are closing. Teachers are being laid off. Emergency rooms are being closed. I mean, in sector after sector, there's been an enormous regression in terms of maintaining services here at home, the attack on what they call the middle class, the working class is the term I would like to use, people who work for a living 9 to 5, who earn hourly wages or salary wages. That has continued unabated, virtually with no difference between the Demopublicans and the Republicrats, or the Thuglicans, as someone has just coined that term, and Democrats is the other one of that. So that attack on the working class, continues with virtually no break. It has been sustained, and you see, and then we see what's happening with the environment, which is being looted, destroyed, predatory capitalism, which is this kind of phase that we're in now. It's a kind of capitalism that is way beyond the robber barons of the 1890s. I mean, there's this great quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, where he says that they make a mess of things and they don't really care. They're extremely careless people, and it's for others to clean up the mess that they make. And they're making a mess, not just for people, but for the planet. Pachamama, Gaia, Mother Earth, Mother Nature, whatever you want to call her, she is in great distress right now because of the pounding that the economic system has been exerting on it. So we really need to rethink basic things of political economy, how we are dealing with the environment. And I think this is the major issue of the 21st century will be eco-issues. The water scarcity around the world, in Texas, I dare say, even though it rained heavily in Houston a couple of days ago, it doesn't matter. This is a water-stressed area. Colorado, Nevada, Utah, California, the Central Valley, the breadbasket of the United States, Arizona, arid zona, all of these areas, and it's not just in the United States. It's, you know, I've lived in Colorado now for 35 years. I'm not a geologist. I can see with my own eyes how the glaciers have shrunk. From Boulder, you can see how they have contracted. And I've traveled to Nepal and to India and to Pakistan, and I've seen the great glaciers there of the Himalayas also contract over a period of years. This is accelerating right now, and it poses enormous dangers to human life as we know it. And what is the response from the political classes? Let's postpone that. Let's have another conference in Durban or Copenhagen or Rio. Let's, you know, drink Chardonnay or Cabernet Sauvignon and have a toast and issue a press release about how much we care about the environment and how, you know, we are eco-friendly, and then go back to business as usual. I mean, it's quite astonishing that there is not any sense of urgency, and I've been talking to young audiences. I spoke at the University of Houston the other day, and they're right in front of me. They are the ones that are going to pay the price, and their children in particular. Because if any of these very conservative scientific estimates bear fruit, there's going to be hell to pay in this country and other countries around the world with rising sea levels, which will submerge not just, and we're not just talking here about polar bears and penguins, and we all love polar bears and penguins, and we buy their calendars, and you know we do good things like drive Priuses and bicycles and recycle cardboard and glass and paper and plastic and all those things, and you compost food as well, and I do all those things. But you know, these are kind of cosmetic measures, not really concrete enough, significant enough to roll back the environmental degradation that is occurring. And there is no sense. Why is there no sense of urgency? Because there cannot be in this economic system, which is driven by one thing only: profits über alles. It's about making money today. What happens 6 months from now or 6 years from now, that's your problem. I need to make money today if I'm a CEO of a large corporation, so I can, you know, not only keep my job, but I can give dividends to the stockholders, the shareholders who voted me in as a CEO, paying me $400 million a year with a private jet, you know, apartments in Paris, London, and New York, and homes in Aspen and Gstaad, and the like. The system itself is dedicated, as Marx, not Groucho, but the other one, said, has a werewolf appetite for profits, hunger. I mean, he actually compares capitalism to a vampire that constantly needs new blood to replenish itself. And this, I think, you know, you don't have to be a Marxist to understand this, because it's right in front of us right now, where there is no concerted effort to maintain and nourish and nurture this pale blue dot in the universe. That's what Carl Sagan called planet Earth. I mean, it is remarkable that we're here, that we do have an existence, and how have we behaved? How have we conducted ourselves vis-a-vis Pachamama, vis-a-vis you know, La Tierra, the Earth? Not very well at all. It's seen by the owners of the economy, the big business interests, as just, you know, plundering of resources to maximize profits. And right now, you know, people ask me, well, what can I do? You know, Obama is considering whether to agree to the Keystone XL pipeline. This would be, if it is agreed to, and if it's built, and which, you know, Texas is going to be involved in this, because the pipeline will be built from northern Alberta, where I've been, out to the Gulf Coast. According to James Hansen, who's the the premier NASA scientist who just resigned, actually, in order to become more active and be free to comment on public issues, he said it would be game over for the planet. Now, Bill McKibben of 350.org, they use terms like tipping point, game over, game changer. I don't know, but one of these things is going to be the game changer. It may not be this one, but look at the risk that we are taking for ourselves, for our children and grandchildren and future generations by playing with this kind of fire. And Obama, of course, should not sign off on the Keystone XL. Should immediately think about all kinds of executive orders that he could issue in terms of protecting the environment, and not waiting for the next fake science report paid for by the Koch brothers that claim that global warming is a fiction, it's a hoax, it's not really happening. It's people who are anti-capitalists that are promoting it. These scientists, I know some of them. I live in Boulder, Colorado. It's a major center of scientific research. They are very conservative people. I mean, they worry about every punctuation mark in their reports, every T that's crossed, every I that's dotted. They want to be absolutely correct. So they're very scrupulous in terms of amassing evidence and then presenting that evidence. And we choose to ignore what's happening at our own peril. And then we get distracted, what will happen with, Johnny Football in College Station. And should the UT Texas coach get $6 million in salary or $5 million? What's a fair wage for him? So let's have a debate about that. What about Madonna? Is she going to adopt another baby from Malawi? Let's have a discussion about that. And talk shows are full of this garbage. Radio talk shows in particular. If you listen to, as Chomsky points out in this book, which I should be mentioning, right? This is supposed to be a book talk, a bookstore. In power systems, if you listen to sports shows, they're very revealing. I don't know how many of you ever listen to these talk shows, which are almost totally dominated by men. The level of analysis and mastery of obscure information is quite impressive. I mean, people will call up and say, in 1949, Ted Williams was up at the plate in Fenway Park. It was the bottom of the ninth inning, and then Casey Stengel made a brilliant move. He brought in a left-hander from the bullpen, Whitey Ford, who was then a young, he wasn't an established star then, and he struck out Ted Williams. Now, people call up and say, yeah, I remember that. They should have fired that bum. I don't know why they gave Williams so much money. He wasn't worth it. Whenever, there was a clutch situation, Ted Williams would strike out. And these people going back and forth talking about the most arcane information. But notice also there's what's prominent is a tremendous fearlessness. They say, trade that bum. Get rid of him. He's no good. The manager's useless. Why did they ever hire him? I'd like to see people talk about politics in those terms with a mastery of information about knowing, why the U.S., deploys so many hundreds of thousands of troops around the world, why it needs almost $1 trillion military budget, 16 intelligence agencies. I know that's pretty staggering by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, look at the NSA. NSA. Who are you going to spy on today? The way I led off today's presentation. If Obama had any integrity, that's of course a conjecture, he would give his ill-begotten Nobel Prize to someone who really deserves it, like Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden. I mean, they are national heroes in my view. And how have they been treated? They have been vilified by the corporate media, even other parts of the media, centrist media, NPR certainly, PBS. Are they the debates about Snowden? Is he a traitor or isn't he? Well, I don't know if you could call him a traitor. Maybe he was misguided. Oh no, the other point of view is, well, he's clearly a traitor. He gave away information that compromised U.S. security, and that's a debate. That's a debate between a spectrum between A and A squared. That's not a debate. That is not two diametrically opposing points of view. And you see this repeated over and over again in any kind of discussion that goes on in the corporate media. And you know, these, again, the patterns are unmistakable. And it's amazing that more people haven't called out the media on these issues. The Pope is now on our side. Have you been listening or hearing some of his recent comments? I mean, it's like right out of Das Kapital. I'll read you a few things. Today, everything comes under the laws of competition and the survival of the fittest, where the powerful feed upon the powerless. As a consequence, masses of people, I mean, this is real Marxist lexicon here, masses of people find themselves excluded and marginalized without work, without possibilities, without any means of escape. The idea of free market will inevitably succeed in bringing about greater justice and inclusiveness in the world has never, emphasis, has never been confirmed by the facts. Today's economic mechanisms promote inordinate consumption, yet it is evident that unbridled consumerism combined with inequality proves doubly damaging to the social fabric. Inequality eventually engenders a violence which recourse to arms cannot and never will be able to resolve. And just 2 days ago, to show you this remarkable turn in the Vatican, the Pope hosted Gustavo Gutierrez of Peru, the father of liberation theology. It's I think, a very noteworthy development, because Gutierrez was, and other proponents of liberation theology like Oscar Romero in Salvador, and the Brazilian prelate whose name escapes me, the one who says, if they ask me to feed the poor, I am called a saint. But if I ask why they are poor, I am called a communist. Gutierrez and these other liberation theologists, what happened to them in the 1980s? Pope John, who is much venerated and is, I guess, already become a saint, he dispatched another pope to be, Benedict, to Central America, to Latin America, and conducted a Stalinist-like purge. Every single one of those liberation theologists, I mean, they weren't sent to a gulag, they weren't sent to Siberia, but in effect, they were totally marginalized. They were sent into rural parishes where they were isolated, where they had no contact with the media, and effectively that ended liberation theology, which was a very democratic movement. And it's very interesting that Pope Francis has now resurrected, as it were, Gutierrez, and has brought him back into the public limelight, as I think he well deserves. What else has been going on that's been pretty positive? Well, Democracy Now! is growing and expanding. It started its 19th year last week. Alternative Radio, my organization in Boulder, there's me and 2 other people, if you can call that an organization. If you come to Boulder, I hope you'll come and visit my very capacious world corporate headquarters. It's about a little bit bigger than the bathroom here, but we're able to do a lot with a little, and I hope you'll go to alternativeradio.org and see the kinds of offerings that we have in terms of some of the issues I've just been talking about: history, environment, Arundhati Roy, Vandana Shiva, Naomi Klein, Chomsky, of course, archives with Howard Zinn, Edward Said. Just did a really interesting program with Sonia Nazario about the courage of immigrants that I highly recommend to you. The Vandana Shiva program, time for a commercial break, even though I'm supposed to be non-commercial, is about seeds of change. She's an Indian physicist who's become a remarkable voice for farmers and sustainable agriculture around the world. And she came to, of all places, Española, New Mexico, a couple of months ago, and I went there. It's about a 6-hour drive from Boulder, and recorded her, and it's called Seeds and Freedom. There's a new Noam Chomsky program called U.S. as a Rogue State. Robert McChesney, The Internet, Capitalism and Democracy, and a very important program by Lester Brown, The Future of Civilization. These are 4 one-hour alternative radio programs. You can get all 4 for $20. Would be $70 if you got them from Boulder. So this is the bargain. Of course, I want you to get books here as well. And did everyone return the copies of these little ones? There should be 2 out there somewhere. You got one, and this should be. Yeah, great. Okay, and alternative radio is occasionally has been broadcast on KOP. It doesn't have a hope in heaven to get on KUT, which is the big NPR affiliate, because KUT, like other NPR affiliates around the country, will not, rock the boat, will not take any risks, will not challenge power, will not challenge corporate hegemony. So the prospect of getting on these large NPR stations, and I've written a book about this called Decline and Fall of Public Broadcasting years ago, is not only remote, it's basically impossible. It would take a revolution in thinking to get radical voices on these radio stations under the National Public Radio banner. So this is how I support myself, other than, of course, massive speaking fees from well-endowed, probably Soros-funded bookstores like MonkeyWrench, not. So alternative radio, Democracy Now! 19 years, alternative radio has just started its 29th year. Next year it'll be 30. We're going forward. Al Jazeera English is now available. We're complaining about the media, but there are sources out there now of independent news and views that simply didn't exist a few years ago. And some of the Al Jazeera documentaries are absolutely terrific about homeless people in India, farmers in Pakistan, kinds of issues that are never even remotely approached by the mainstream media. RT has some very good stuff on from time to time as well. Of course, they won't, it's the Russian state television network, they won't criticize Putin, but they do some very good news reporting. So that's very positive. And then an amazing thing happened, like for our side. We've got a billionaire. The eBay founder, Pierre Omidyar, has just given $250 million to set up what is called First Look Media. And that involves people like Glenn Greenwald and Jeremy Scahill and Laura Poitras. And just recently, Matt Taibbi left Rolling Stone to join this new independent investigative media operation. So those are very positive developments. While overall you can see these black clouds, let's not ignore the sunlight that does seep through from time to time. And he's put his money where his mouth is. He's French-born, Omidyar that is. He's French-born, he's Iranian-American. And as I said, he made his fortune by inventing eBay. And now he's backing this new media venture. And I have a lot of respect for Greenwald and Scahill. I mean, I know them. I consider them friends and colleagues. So I'm very optimistic about that moving forward. And they also have a new website called theintercept.org. Another, I think, really great development was the election of the first socialist in many, many years to the Seattle City Council, a woman of South Asian origin, Kshama Sawant. And nearby SeaTac, voters there passed legislation to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. There are things going on around the country. We don't have, a great media system that lets people know what's going on in terms of these, different forms of resistance against fracking. Ordinances are being passed all over the place to resist fracking. And I noticed that right here in Bartonville, well, not right here, but just outside of Denton, there's a town called Bartonville. And guess who lives there? The CEO of ExxonMobil. And guess what he's opposed to? The location of a fracking site right near his property. I guess he's worried maybe something is amiss with this fracking deal. That's a very interesting development. His first name is Rex. incidentally, which means king in Latin. And so, and he's making tens of millions of dollars in compensation as the CEO of Exxon Mobil. It's hard to think, I mentioned war criminals before, and it's pretty easy to identify them, and it's fairly unambiguous, Bush and Wolfowitz and all the rest. But then you have war criminal corporations that are killing the earth. Who is going to indict them? Who is going to punish them? I'm not talking about $2 million fines or $40 million fines. I mean, that's like chump change for them. And then they write it off as a business expense. It's an operational kind of contingency where they have money put away. Oh, this woman is going to sue us, fine, give her $1 million, get rid of her. Give this guy $2 million, no problem. It's kind of the way the system operates. And speaking again of the economic system and the lies that are told about it, there's virtually not a single sector in this economic system, which is wrongly called capitalism, that is not benefiting from massive state intervention. That is to say, we the people, pay for the gains of capitalism, the gains of the captains of industry say they have invented. So all of you know about the internet, right? We know Bill Gates invented the internet in a garage in Palo Alto or Sunnyvale or Portola Valley, I forget where. Not. The internet was invented where? At public expense at the Pentagon through the DARPA program, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. There's all of the avionics on the plane that I flew on a couple of days ago to come here, invented by the Pentagon. Radar, all the equipment is all military equipment paid for by taxpayers, then suddenly goes over into the private sector. So the real mantra, how capitalism really operates, not the fake things they teach at UT economics departments, but the way it really operates is that the research and the costs, startup costs, are all publicly funded. And if the enterprise fails, the public will rescue it. If it succeeds, then it's handed over to the private sector. And we, the people, get nothing. What do we get? Oh, we get something. We get astronomical airfares. We get higher cable prices. Like right now, Comcast is about to swallow up Time Warner. You think that's going to lower your cable bill? Not. It's going to increase your cable bill. I remember in 1996 when Bill Clinton was running around the country, as well as Al Gore, touting the Telecommunications Reform Act. Whenever you hear the word reform, you better reach for your wallet because somebody's got their hand in your pocket and is about to rob you. It's another one of the myths of the system that there's real reform. And I remember at the time interviewing Timothy Worth. He was the Democratic representative from Boulder, and he was touting this Telecommunications Reform Act. Oh, if this goes through, it's going to be a bounty for all of our citizens. There'll be free internet. There'll be massive competition, which will drive prices down. Cable will be cheap beyond belief, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what's happened since this so-called, Reform Act has passed? It has released merger mania, takeovers. Has your cable bill gone down? Mine hasn't. It's certainly escalating for people here and all over the country. Another area where there's massive taxpayer intervention, that is we the people, is in the health sector. We have 4 national institutes of health, which are funded by us, where the top doctors and researchers invent new vaccines, medicines, cures, to benefit we the people. Then what happens after these vaccines and cures are developed at our expense? Somehow, and this must happen at 3 a.m. when everyone's sleeping, these inventions suddenly find themselves property of Pfizer, property of Smith, Glasgow, and Klein, property of E.J. Lilly. E.I. Lilly? E.J. Lilly. You know who I mean. One of the major pharmaceutical corporations. How does that happen? So the lies of the system, as repeated through the corporate media, perpetuates this kind of taxpayer subsidized capitalism. That's really what we have. Taxpayer. If we were honest in using language. And I think that's really important. And Orwell was so prescient in defining that. And I think one of the things that Chomsky has made a major contribution to is the precise use of language. Eli Lilly, not Eli Manning, quarterback for the New York Giants, but Eli Lilly is another one of these pharmaceutical giants. So, and again, in all of these industries, what do we find? We find concentration. We don't find competition because that's for UT economics courses that, capitalists believe in competition and development of different, variety of sources. They believe in monopoly control. They want to drive their competitors out of business. So what's happened since the great economic crash of 2007, 2008? There are now 4 big banks standing. There's Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Citicorp, and JP Morgan Chase. Consolidation. The same thing in sector after sector. There are fewer and fewer corporations as there's more and more concentration and government-enabled mergers to allow those concentrations to take place. So there's a lot of work to be done, to say the least. But I think we make a start when we can see clearly, what the problem is, because it's important to have a correct diagnosis. If your diagnosis is incorrect, then all the remedies you might be proposing will never be effective because you have the wrong diagnosis. So we have a medical crisis in the country today because people are misidentifying the problem. They're saying, well, it's Bernie Madoff, it's Ken Lay, it's Gordon Gekko in Wall Street, it's Jordan Belfort in The Wolf of Wall Street, or it's Michael Milken or Ivan Boesky. There are all these rotten, we got to get rid of these people. They're spoiling everything. There's total attention paid to rotten apples and no attention paid to the barrel that produces the apples. And so if we're going to address this as a medical emergency, as I think we should, then we have to be able to diagnose clearly that it is the barrel that is producing these problems and not just focus on the manifestations, the outgrowth. It's like, let's say you have acne and you go to the doctor, a dermatologist, and he or she gives you this lotion or that lotion and, it doesn't quite work. And then you go back again and you get a new lotion. But the problem is something more fundamental in your system that is producing this external manifestation of acne. I'm going to actually wind this up and maybe take some questions and have some commentary from you. I'd like to read Edward Said's favorite poem. Edward Said was a wonderful Palestinian-American scholar. He's a friend, inspiration to me, a mentor, and to many others. He and I did a couple of books together. We've got, I don't know, maybe 45 programs in the alternative radio Edward Said archive. His favorite poem was called Waiting for the Barbarians. It was written by Constantine Cavafy, a Greek-Egyptian poet who was born in 1864. He died in 1933. I think this really speaks a lot to the post-9/11 hysteria and the growth of the national surveillance state, the NSS. What are we waiting for assembled in the forum? The barbarians are due here today. Why isn't anything happening in the Senate? Why do the senators sit there without legislating? Because the barbarians are coming today. What laws can the senators make now? Once the barbarians are here, they'll do the legislating. Why did our emperor get up so early, and why is he sitting at the city's main gate on his throne, wearing the crown? Because the barbarians are coming today, and the emperor is waiting to receive their leader. He has even prepared a scroll to give him, replete with titles. Why have our 2 councils come out today wearing their embroidered scarlet togas? Why have they put on bracelets with rings sparkling with magnificent emeralds? Why are they carrying elegant canes beautifully worked in silver and gold? Because the barbarians are coming today, and things like that dazzle the barbarians. Why don't our distinguished orators come forward as usual to make their speeches and say what they have to say? Because the barbarians are coming today, and they're bored by rhetoric and public speaking. Why this sudden restlessness, this confusion? How serious people's faces have become. Why are the streets and squares emptying so rapidly? Everyone going home, so lost in thought. Because night has fallen, and the barbarians have not come. And some who have just returned from the border say, there are no barbarians any longer. And now, what's going to happen to us without barbarians? They were, those people, a kind of solution. Gil Scott-Heron is one of the most important cultural figures of the 20th century. I think it's safe to say the progenitor of hip-hop and rap. Sadly died at a very young age, but a great cultural force. And perhaps his most famous work is The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. And I have kind of reworked this into a modern context, sandpapered out some of the misogyny and sexist comments that were in the original. And this is set to A Night in Tunisia. You'll not be able to stay home, brothers and sisters. You'll not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You'll not be able to lose yourself on TV and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by Citicorp, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America. The revolution will not show you pictures of Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Donald Trump, or the Koch brothers. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by NPR, PBS, CBS, ABC, NBC, MSNBC, CNN, and Fox, and will not star Tom Cruise, Julia Roberts, J-Lo, Nicole Kidman, and Leonardo DiCaprio. The revolution will not give your mouth sex appeal. The revolution will not get rid of zits. The revolution will not make you look 5 pounds lighter. The revolution will not be televised. There'll be no pictures of you and Miley Cyrus, Katy Perry, Beyonce, Adele, Rihanna, or Lady Gaga because the revolution will not be televised. There'll be no iPhones, iMacs, iPads, and iTunes, Masterpiece Theatre, and Downtown Abbey will no longer be relevant, and women will not care if Dick gets it on with Jane on the world turns, as the world turns, because people will be in the streets looking for a brighter day. The revolution will not be televised. There'll be no highlights on the 10 o'clock news with theme music sung by Frank Sinatra, because the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be right back after a message about Snow White, white chocolate, white sheets, white flight, or white people. You will not have to worry about your hair falling out or the stains in your toilet bowl. The revolution will not go better with Coke, Pepsi, Sprite, or Diet 7-Up. The revolution will not fight the germs that may cause bad breath. The revolution will put you in the driver's seat. The revolution will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised. There will be no rerun, brothers and sisters. The revolution will be live. Thank you very much. The question is, what is ultimately the U.S. goal? It wants to dominate everything. What's it going to have at the end when it controls the world? Do you know the Yiddish word bupkis? It's any Yiddish speakers here? One. So you know it's goat snot. In other words, nothing. That's what they're going to, because the planet will have been destroyed. If we continue to practice this unrelenting aggression, militarization, if we still seek political solutions out of the barrel of a gun, I think the outcome is fairly certain. It may not be in this decade, it may not be in the next decade, but it's certainly, I think, in the coming years, we'll see a gradual contraction of U.S. power. It can't be maintained. The U.S. has held an upper hand because it had economic power. That economic power is fast receding because of internal decisions made by the capitalist class in shifting production overseas, in dismantling the manufacturing sector here at home, all in the lust for short-term profits. And again, enabled by our two great parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. So I think, keep your eye on China. It's not clear what's, going to happen there. But, China has had a bad couple of centuries. But they're back. And, they're growing and they're using economic power, I think, in very skillful ways. They're also doing a horrendous job in terms of their own environment. And you may have noticed, people wearing masks, and there are all kinds of smog alerts in major Chinese cities. There too, the kind of state capitalism that's practiced there has completely run amok. And so there's been a tremendous environmental degradation and destruction in China. But why is the Obama administration talking about a pivot to Asia? What's that about? It's about containing China. China is the new Russia. The Islamic threat is going to disappear. It's very weak to begin with. We're talking about gangs of people that can do terrible things. Okay, let's condemn the terrible things, blowing up buses and schools and things like that. Nobody wants that. But they are not a threat, an existential threat to U.S. power. China poses that threat in the long run. And that's why you see all this movement of setting new military bases throughout Asia. I'd like to see the U.S., again, pivot itself more toward home and take care of business and people here, give us free education, quality health care, clean up the environment. There's so much work to be done here. There's so many people out of work. What does that say about an economic system that has so many things that need to be done, so many people that are out of work, and this system cannot bring them together? That speaks to me of a major flaw in the way the economic system is constructed. Yes, the gentleman is saying that there are about 85 families, richest families, that have tremendous influence. What will happen to the world if there is this kind of chasm between the haves and the have-nots? Well, I think it's unfortunately safe to say that there will be conflict in the world over food, over water, again, all related to the oncoming environmental crises, which cannot be addressed by moving deck chairs on the Titanic. You may be biking, as I said, or recycling, but that's not going to do it. The ship has to stop where it is right now and cannot continue on its present course, because it's going to hit that iceberg and it's going to sink, taking everyone down with it. Chris Hedges, who I admire very much and is one of the best journalists, I think, and thinkers that we have in the country today, just came out with a new essay comparing the United States and the kind of capitalism that's being practiced here with Moby Dick and Captain Ahab. In Melville's novel, Ahab is this out-of-control maniac that is totally monomaniacal and is dead set on killing the white whale. Who is the white whale? Nature. It is purity. It is the environment. And Ahab only wants his vengeance, and he's determined to take everyone with him. And through demagoguery, through threats, through cajoling and sheer charisma, he persuades everyone on the ship to go along with him in this mad venture, including Starbuck, for which this infamous coffee house is named. Initially, Starbuck resisted Ahab's entreaties to go after the white whale. He says, it's too dangerous. We don't need to go there. We've already caught plenty of whale meat. We don't need to do any more. Let's go home. Our families are waiting for us. But even he was won over. Now, to get to your question specifically, if the environmental crisis is not addressed, there will be food shortages, because with less water, with less glacial runoff, particularly in South Asia and in China and Southeast Asia, what does it mean? It means that there'll be less water in the rivers. Less water means less water for irrigation. Again, you don't have to be, the Minister of Agriculture to figure this out. There will be fewer crops. Fewer crops means prices will go up. Prices will go up. People will be, financially hard-pressed. It'll be a scenario for permanent conflict. And the rich will build higher and higher gates They'll live behind higher and higher walls to protect themselves. They'll have more and more security guards. And the rest of us, it's kind of like almost a science fiction scenario. The rest of us will be scrounging out there in the darkness, going into dumpsters and garbage cans, looking for food. I mean, some people are talking in these dire terms. Now, I don't want to scare you, but I do want to scare you. Simultaneously, I want to alert you to the dangers which are, I think, looming not centuries away, but in your lifetime, in our lifetime. The question is about Afghanistan. What do I think will happen there after U.S. and NATO troops are withdrawn at the end of 2014? Well, they're still there, and they're negotiating a status of agreement with the Afghan government that Karzai has been resisting. Now, recent statements would lead me to believe that they're going to wait for a new president to negotiate. There are going to be elections, and Karzai cannot succeed himself. So it's probable that there will continue to be a U.S. military presence there. That's certainly what the Pentagon wants, and that's what the Obama administration wants, to keep a residual force in Afghanistan, to use it not only within Afghanistan, but in other operations vis-a-vis Pakistan and north in Central Asia. Also, Afghanistan has a huge border with Iran. And so the U.S. military wants to have that kind of leverage vis-a-vis Iran as well. So the country has been devastated. It has seen now decades of war. The U.S. invasion, which was totally unnecessary, absolutely unnecessary. It would be like, I use this example, let's say a gang in Galveston came into Austin and killed 3,000 people. And the gang went back to Galveston. And you, the people of Austin, were so enraged that you launched a massive attack on Galveston, scorched earth, carpet bombing, killing hundreds of thousands of people because of the actions of one gang in that particular town. Not even local people, by the way. People who had come there from other countries, again, connected to this, to the Afghan Mujahideen, to the building up of those jihadi fighters in the 1980s. So my heart breaks when I think about Afghanistan. I've been there. It's a hard-scrabble country to begin with. It has, really been in a vice in terms of being caught between U.S. Power interests and perceived strategic interests in that region. I mean, it's one of the great crimes of the modern period. And again, something for which Bush has not been held accountable. So one of the, derisive terms, and you only have to laugh or wince or cry, is the term international law. I mean, it's become a joke in U.S. discourse. International law is whatever the U.S. says it is at any given moment, and is applied very selectively. So if any lawyers out here, you know that if laws are not applied uniformly, they have no validity. They have to be applied across the board, and that's not the case at all. Thank you so much for coming. Go to alternativeradio.org. Thank you. So the long-term prognosis is, I think, not good for Afghanistan. But, do I want U.S. troops, still stationed there? No, I don't think anything good will come from that. Well, I'd like to see, as Howard Zinn used to say before he died, I'd like to see our country be a humanitarian superpower, not a military superpower. I'd like to be, I'd like it to drop medicine and food and blankets and not bombs, not using drones to attack wedding parties, as happened in many times in Pakistan and Syria, not in Syria, in Yemen and other places around the world. I'm very worried about Syria. I have good friends there. I've been there multiple times. My mother was there after the Armenian genocide. She was 6 years in Aleppo which is one of the major sites of fighting today. I'm sorry to say that I don't see any easy solution to the civil war in Syria. It's being funded by everybody and his grandmother. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates are supporting the jihadis. They want to see the end of a Shia state. They're not exactly Shia. Assad is not exactly Shia. It's an Alawite sect of Islam, but it's not Sunni. It's not the main branch of Islam. And so by defeating Assad and destroying the regime there, they also, by extension, weaken Iran, which Saudi Arabia sees as a huge threat to its existence. Why it sees that as a threat is a mystery to me. It has never, made any threatening remarks about Saudi Arabia. Israel also sees Iran as a threat and has enunciated that numerous times and has threatened Iran with first strike if it proceeds with its nuclear program. But now with the election of Hassan Rouhani, that bellicose rhetoric, which was so common under Ahmadinejad, who was just an absolute, I think, bird brain when it came to international politics, and contributed a lot to Israeli paranoia by making wild, statements about Israel and its existence. So what's happening also then? Syria is supporting the Assad regime. China is supporting the Assad regime for their own geopolitical reasons. The U.S. wants Assad out. Obama has already announced Assad must go. That's not a good bargaining position to sit down when you say that, you are already, ipso facto illegitimate, and you do not have a right to sit here. And so what's going on in Geneva is a kind of charade of, epic proportions and posturing, because the opposition basic position is that the government has to go. And they're not going to capitulate. They're not going to sign on to their own suicide. So it looks like Assad is there for the long haul, and it looks like the country's going to split. There's going to be some kind of sectarian divide. There might be a Christian Alawite area, and then there may be a larger Sunni area. So it's not a very good situation. In neighboring Lebanon, where again I've spent a lot of time, and I know a lot better than Syria, there was a civil war for more than 15 years, from 1975 to 1990, until it stopped from sheer exhaustion. I mean, the warring factions in the armies, they stopped fighting. They were tired. And that's how there was some kind of settlement in Lebanon. But the U.S. hand has been very heavy in Syria. It's been, there's been cyber warfare. There's been all kinds of intelligence activities, including Navy SEALs going into Syria. Israel has bombed Syria multiple times, which is, illegal under international law. But when you're part of the empire, international law does not apply to you. You have a permanent exemption, a permanent get-out-of-jail pass. And in that case, Israel is privileged as no other country is because it is so close to the United States. So I'm very worried about my friends there. I'm worried about the very future of the country, because once that trust is broken between different communities, people start looking over their shoulders. They're worrying about, can I say this to this person, because she's from that group, or can I trust her? And once that is lost, it's very hard to reconstruct that. And there's a certain trust, a bond. It's like in relationships, you have someone you love and care for, and then you start worrying you start censoring yourself, you start editing yourself, and that is a very slippery slope to be on. And I think that's where, unfortunately, millions of Syrians, who now constitute, I believe, the largest refugee population on earth, exceeding the Afghans, refugee population. So it's a very terrible situation, and I don't have any brilliant answers to get out of it. But I hope there's some kind of humanitarian relief. The people who want to get out are allowed to leave. The people who want to stay are given food, are given clothing, are given medicine that they desperately need. And that's where I think the U.S. can really play a major role. Thanks very much, and good evening.